Before we
Be
get
ready.
started, is Michael Layden is here, and I think this is his first time joining us, so I thought he could introduce himself. He's our representative from STB, and he's been in Europe, so has been unable to join some of these calls. And then I think also Xanthia, this is her first one as well.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I am here. Apologies that I'm not on camera. I'm driving at the moment.
Hi, nice to meet everybody. I'm a professor in biological sciences at Lehigh University, and I've been a member of the Public Affairs Committee and chair of Public Affairs Committee for SDB for the last couple of years. So generally, this is sort of advocating for the sciences is something that I'm pretty passionate about, which I think is how I ended up being nominated by them to be part of FASEB. So thank you for having me.
Great. And with that, I think we can go ahead and get started, Mary Ann.
Okay, thank you all. For Mike, you don't know me, I'm Mary Ann Bernstein. I'm the immediate past president, or the immediate past president of FASEB. And I ran the leadership development committee, so I've been tasked with helping you guys get onboarded. So this is our third meeting. I want to welcome all of you, and you'll be really happy to hear that it's also our last onboarding meeting. So that will be good news as well. I appreciate your attention and your discussion during these sessions. So before we jump into the material for today, I just want to ask if there's any follow-up questions from either session 1 or 2. If you could just raise your hand if you have a question, even during the presentation, that would make it a lot easier to see you. Okay, everything's crystal clear so far. Cool. We'll see if we can do something about that this session. So why don't we jump right in? For this session, we're going to focus on best practices of serving on the FASEB board. Sally, are you able to pull up?
Yeah, there's something really weird going on. I think Zoom just did an update or something, and it is very, something very strange is happening. I'm sorry. It's like, give me 1 second.
Sally, a question for you. Is this
Yes.
Onboarding presentation? Are the people in the session, are you all logged into the presentation?
No.
They shouldn't be. So there's this guest contributor. There are 4 logged into the presentation.
I do not know what is. There's a lot of weird things happening right now, Frank, with Zoom.
I think that's what's causing your problem.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll go. Okay, are you guys seeing the session 3 agenda?
No, seeing your screen that has the
second.
list of files.
Yeah. Oh, the GC is Glendy. This is very strange. I'm sorry. Somebody is in here. Yeah, you're right, Frank. I could see that right then. I apologize. These are issues I've never experienced before.
Can you kick them out?
I don't.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. So Sally, I saved locally. Let me.
So just in case.
Oh, I see. Okay. I see the guest contributor.
So just in case any thinking that your institution is the only one that has IT problems, this will make you feel a lot better. It's everywhere.
I'm pulling up the PDF. We are using the PDF.
Okay, I'm happy to use the PDF.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. Okay, here we go. Okay. There we go.
Great. Can you jump to presentation? There we go. You can go back 1 slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the session agenda for today is we're going to go through director responsibilities first and just kind of fill in some of the gaps that we may have had from last orientation. Then we'll go through specifics about board meetings, member best practices, society representation, and FASEB fiduciary, which was a topic that enjoyed a lot of discussion last time. So we'll come back to that again. And then Sally will end up with giving us some resources. So next slide, please. All right, so this session will focus on best practices of serving on the FASEB board. And as a reminder, these are the general responsibilities for any board member at any organization. It's not just specific for FASEB. Today we'll talk a little bit more about what these responsibilities look like in action, but I just want to remind you, again, with regard to session 2, when you're named a fiduciary, which you all have done as members of the FASEB board, and when you accept that role, you must by law manage the person's or the federation's money and property for the federation's benefit, not for yours. So I think this came up a few times, different ways last session. So we just want to clarify, maybe with slightly different language. So hopefully all of this will become easier to navigate as we go through. So we have overall welfare of FASEB, adequate revenue and responsible use of resources. This is what all board members are responsible for: organizational excellence, ethics, and organizational policy. The board is also involved in the hiring and evaluation of the chief executive officer, and also is responsible for legal compliance. And we're laying out some of those guidelines for you during these onboarding sessions. So can I have the next slide, please? So the leadership committee, development committee, created the position description that lays out the job duties that are involved, and those are listed for you here. I think amongst these, some of these are really obvious things, but one of the most important things is that you prepare for and attend monthly virtual meetings and up to 3 in-person meetings annually. So what that means in terms of raw numbers for the year is that the bylaws require attendance at least 8 meetings annually. In-person dates for the board meetings include March. What the dates will be announced, and this is held in conjunction with Capitol Hill Day. I think we've already gone through the expectation that each director will exercise independent judgment and have a willingness to express dissenting views, engage in the conversation based on the information that you're provided in the board packets, but also during the board meeting. And please, and it says, do not speak for FASEB unless authorized to do so. Remain mindful of distinct roles when interacting with FASEB staff, meaning that each of the staff have different obligations. And if you have a request to make, it needs to go through the Chief Executive Officer, Frank, first. Okay, so please don't be contacting individual board members to do things that you think would be great for FASEB. Bring the idea to the board or to Eric Kelly, who is the president of the board, and that will be transmitted to Frank and brought up for discussion so that there can be more of a generative discussion to see if there are some new ideas that FASEB will want to take on. And then just complying with code of conduct and travel policies. And this is going to be long, so you can interrupt me at any time if you have a question or a comment. Okay, next slide, please. So attendance. So from the bylaws, we already said that you need to attend either in person or electronically at least 8 regular board meetings annually. If you are unable to do that, then you will be encouraged to reevaluate your commitment to FASEB. And you'll be encouraged to do that, have that conversation with your own society's executive officer and volunteer leadership. Because it's important not only for the Federation to hear your voice and have each society representative participate, but your society benefits from your role on the board and the information that you bring to the board and the information you bring back from the board. So it's in everybody's best interest, win-win, that you're all engaged. And it's just for clarification in the bylaws that the board may deem a director who's missed 4 consecutive meetings without notification or explanation to have resigned from the board, and then we will contact your society and ask for another representative.
And then I would just add to this, Marianne, that as long as you let us know that you're unable to attend, that meets the threshold. It's fairly low. Just communicate that you're not going to be here. I don't need to know why. If you want to tell me, that's fine. But just give us a heads up that you will not be able to attend. I try to put this in the message when we send the agendas. And then this is more when we do have people that just kind of drop off the face of the earth and we don't know what's going on with them.
Yeah, and part of the dues that each society pays in the membership in the federation, this is one of the perks and this is one of the benefits. So it's really important that we all help make that as effective as possible. Okay, next slide. So we'd also like to spend a little bit of time. It's really important to note how board member responsibilities differ from those of the FASEB staff. So on the left is staff specific functions and on the right, board member specific ones. You can see that there's often complementary roles between the two, but they are distinct. So probably most importantly for staff, they are responsible for facilitating the logistics necessary for the board to achieve its objectives. And this includes all the things like scheduling draft meeting agendas, maintaining rosters, ensuring the board is working with FASEB's governance and strategic framework to get the board packets out to you, to prepare them. And all of FASEB staff report to the executive director. So if there's ever an issue that any director has with a staff member, that concern should be directed to the executive director, Frank. And he will deal with any staff member if there's any issue. That would be the best way to ensure that everybody's in the know and this is done in a effective manner. So as executive director, Chief Executive Officer, Frank is exclusively responsible for the management and execution of the budget and operating plan once they've been approved by the board. But the plans are approved by the board first. Frank reports directly to the board of directors and is evaluated by the board of directors. And the board members themselves report to the FASEB president, who is Eric Kellen. He's on the line with us. So I think this is pretty clear in terms of what is expected of directors and what is expected of staff. Do you guys have any questions about this before we move on? No? Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide, please. So for this board meetings section, I'm going to turn it over to Sally. She'll take you through this and then I'll come back after for best practices. Sally? Great.
Thanks, Marianne. Okay, so this is a rundown of our calendar of board meetings for 25-26. You should all have received calendar appointments and Outlook for all of our virtual meetings. We're just finalizing as soon as we get the Capitol Hill Day and March one-day meeting finalized, I'll go ahead and send calendar appointments out for those longer meetings, which are in teal on here, and for Capitol Hill Day. We are actually going to do a poll at our August board meeting to figure out the date for Capitol Hill Day. I'm sure you're all aware, we're not going to find a date that works absolutely perfectly for everyone, but we are limited by the congressional calendar and also not trying to compete with any member society annual meetings. So as you are aware, our monthly virtual meetings typically occur on the first Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern. We do schedule them for 1.5 hours. If we do not have 1.5 hours worth of material, we will not keep you there for the full time. We are very cognizant of using your time wisely, and each month the board actions that must be taken to keep FASEB operating, and they may include approval of science policy statements, reviewing and approving committee charters and task force charters, and providing input into programs that are in development or currently ongoing, that sort of thing. And I think for those of you that were at the July board meeting, we did several of these things. We had some science policy items. We also approved a committee charter for our executive search committee. However, there are some activities that happen at prescribed times each year, and I tried to list those on this chart. So the big ones are the budget items for the board. So in September, you will review the budget guidelines and principles that the finance and executive committees will develop to guide the creation of the budget. In December, we have to approve the budget for the upcoming year. We start looking at the funding recommendations for the upcoming fiscal year in January and February. And that's important because our Office of Public Affairs then uses that feedback from the board to create the materials that we will take to Capitol Hill. So those are kind of the flow for things. And then at any given time, there'll be lots of other issues that pop up. The board agendas are typically sent on the Thursday afternoon before our regular monthly meetings, and we strive for 2 weeks out for our longer meetings or an in-person meeting. I send an email as soon as the agendas are ready. I will say there are a couple of times each year where the calendar just doesn't line up correctly, and we have to put addendums onto the board agenda. So anytime we're adding new items to a board agenda, we will be sure to let you know. And as we mentioned, it is part of your duty of care to be prepared. So make sure that you're reviewing the materials. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with any of the officers, and they will be sure to kind of answer your questions. So this is how we break up the work of the board. Sorry, I have 2 screens, so I can do this. And one thing to notice about the FASEB board, and something that we're proud of, is we do strive to ensure your time is spent substantively. This isn't a board where you're going to have hours and hours of staff reports on different projects or initiatives. To do this, we divide our work into 4 categories, and this pyramid shows roughly how we want that time spent during a meeting. So the operational items are basically what do we have and how do we use it? This is facts, figures, financials. This is things like our consent agenda every month. Anything that just kind of has to happen. It may not be the most interesting, but we also don't have to spend that much time on it. Next, we have our strategic items. This is where we're setting priorities for the Federation. This may be where we're reviewing or modifying strategic plans. Recently for the board, this has been our different business plans, operating scenarios, that sort of thing. And then also when we monitor the performance against the plans that we put in place. Next, and this is unique to FASEB, is our policy efforts. So this is when we are reviewing items that come from the Science Policy Committee, statements that are going to go out on behalf of FASEB, when we talk about our funding recommendations, that sort of thing. And finally, we have the generative time. And this is basically when the board decides what they're going to decide, really looking at challenges and opportunities. Especially during in-person or the longer board meetings, this is where we will have activities where we really need the board to brainstorm and deliver their feedback and input. So oftentimes at our board meetings, our in-person board meetings, this will include sticky notes. For the longer virtual meetings, this will be a lot of breakout room time and that sort of thing. Okay, so this slide illustrates how things evolve from an item of interest or somebody saying we need to do something about blank to how it actually gets to the board and how it then actually becomes a policy statement or something that has been disseminated on behalf of FASEB. And we'll go through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. And these slides were created specifically because we did have some feedback that folks were confused about how things happened in a committee structure and then how that connected to what the board does. So first, we have our issue identification. So this is basically when somebody says FASEB should do something about blank. It can happen in a variety of ways. Some examples that we often see are board and committee members. FASEB staff identify things. Our public affairs staff are constantly looking at the Federal Register to see if there are items that FASEB should be aware of and commenting on. And we also sometimes take up issues because member society staff identify something and they realize that this isn't something that it would be, it may be something that that society will comment on, but they recognize that the strength of having the Federation do it will better serve the community. We also have some subcommittees, and they will identify issues as well. And sometimes we are directly contacted by NIH or NSF to comment on something they are thinking about. I will also note that we include open mic time at the end of every agenda that we have at FASEB, be it the board, be it the committee. If there is something that you think FASEB should be working on, or something that FASEB should be addressing, or a concern that you have, the open mic time is a really wonderful time to mention that. And then that will go to the presidents, and then they will figure out, like, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to address, and how? So be aware that that open mic time is not just there as a buffer. It is intentionally there to gather ideas and your feedback. So next is when the action plan is created. And so this makes it sound a little bit more formal than this actually is. But this is often, and you'll see I had the color coding there of like what's staff, what's all volunteer, and that sort of thing. This step is really, I won't say staff driven, but staff does have a lot of input in this. And just expertise in knowing, do we need to get a specific committee to look into this further? Maybe we need a subcommittee. And so oftentimes you'll see items that come through the Science Policy Committee that have been reviewed by the Animals and Research Subcommittee or the Training and Career Workforce or the Training and Career Opportunities Subcommittee if it's issue specific. It may also be something that we think we want the DEAI committee to investigate for, investigate's a strong word, but we want them to consider further before the board takes it under control, or not control, under as the board starts to review. We also, at this point, may decide that this is a bigger issue that needs to be tackled, and we need to create a separate task force for it. At this point in the process, we also need to think about who are the stakeholders, who are the people that are going to be impacted by the item under consideration, and make sure that we're building in time into the process to take their feedback into consideration. And this, we talked about this a little bit at our last meeting. This is something that we really do take very seriously. And so this is where we want to make sure we're getting the feedback from our member society staff. That may happen during the Friday Public Affairs meeting, or it could happen our monthly Executive Officers Advisory Committee meeting. So we want to make sure that before the board is taking final action on something, that the stakeholders involved have been considered. Finally, this is like where we think about, okay, what's the timing of this? And sometimes, especially with RFIs and other things that are coming from the federal government, they set the deadline. And so then we kind of have to work from that. So there will be times, and we'll talk about this just a little bit more, where something needs to go to the executive committee instead of the board because the timeline just does not allow for board review and approval. Next is when we get into deliberation and development, and you'll notice this is the gray box. This is where the volunteers really take the lead, and it is critically important that their expertise is called into play when we're discussing these different issues. So this is usually undertaken by committees, task forces, subcommittees, or sometimes staff, but mostly committees, subcommittees, or task forces. It may involve feedback from the board or other stakeholders. And it's important to note that whatever comes out of these groups is a recommendation to the board. So the board, as the fiduciary of FASEB, is the only group that can issue the final statement, can make the final decision, any of those sorts of things. So the work coming out of those groups is a recommendation. And right now, you will likely see this at the next board meeting. I think there are a couple of things that are happening at the SPC committee where they're in the deliberation and development mode right now, but it will have to go to the board before it is issued publicly. We also have a couple of task forces right now that are doing a lot of work, and what they are working towards is a set of recommendations that will go to the board for adoption and approval later this year. And again, and we mentioned this a few times last week, just like at the board, what happens at the committee, subcommittee, task force should be kept confidential. You know, we can talk about the reasoning, but we never attribute who is saying what at any meeting or any of that sort of thing. And there may be times where the work of the committee or subcommittee or task force does need to be completely confidential until it's ready for a more public airing. Okay, finally, after we go through all of that process, items get to the board. And this is where the recommended action is presented by the committee, task force chair, or responsible staff member. Oftentimes at our board meeting, and you saw this in July, it will be the chair of that committee that presents the item. And so for a lot of FASEB items, it will be our vice president for science policy who is presenting the item. If it's an item that went to the DEAI committee, the vice president for DEAI will be presenting, and so on. There are some times where it is easiest or most efficient for a staff member to present the material. And we do try to make the presenter be the person who can answer the most questions about it, about whatever item is being discussed. We talked about this a little bit last week as well, that the recommendations or the action coming to the board should not be a surprise to the board. Even though this looks like a straight line, in reality, there's a lot of back and forth and making sure that we're getting feedback from all sorts of groups throughout the process. So the board should not be surprised at a meeting by any one action that's coming up. The recommendation should include enough information to ensure that the board is making an informed decision. And so you will see in the presentations of a lot of items where the presenter will discuss what the proposed item says. Oftentimes it's a statement or something like that. But they will also talk about how the committee or the task force arose at that decision, citing that it went to a subcommittee first or it got feedback from another group, that sort of thing. And then when I'm sorry, I have someone coming into my house right now. And then so that is so that the board can be sure that it was a real deliberative process that resulted in that recommendation. We do not want the board to re-litigate the work done. So we often say this, like the committee are our expert bodies, the task force are the expert bodies. We do want the board, if you have questions, please raise them, but we want to make sure that we are not crossing into like redoing the work that those groups have spent a lot of time working on. That's one of the trickier parts, I think, of being a board member anywhere. And so there will be some times where Eric will say, hey, I think we're starting to get into redoing the work of the committee and we need to draw it back to, does this work or not? If there are actions, and I just mentioned one instance as well, that are relatively minor in scope or they're in line with something the board has previously approved, it can go to our executive committee. And the executive committee is scheduled to meet weekly. And as I had mentioned, there are sometimes time-sensitive items that have to go to the executive committee. And just for timeliness. And then oftentimes we'll get things like a sign-on letter from another organization or coalition that we are a member of that is going to go to Congress or something. And it is basically restating things that the FASEB board has already approved and agrees with. And so the executive committee can take action on that. I think there's only been less than a handful of times since I've been at FASEB where there was something completely novel that the executive committee decided on. And we do post all the executive committee actions online. I'll show you where those live in just a minute. So board members can always look at those. If there is a big issue that the executive committee took action on that the board was not aware that they were going to do, we are sure to communicate with the board as soon as possible. And again, I think this has happened 3 or 4 times the entire time I've been at FASEB, and I'm sure some of you can imagine what those times are when we felt like we needed to respond after the murder of George Floyd. Another one was when there was an issue with the OSTP director. So there are some issues like that, but we will be sure to let the board know as soon as those actions are taken and the reasoning behind them. And if it's a really big issue, we will ask the board to reaffirm that decision at their next meeting.
Sally, quick question.
Yeah.
Who comprises the executive committee?
Oh, so the executive committee is all of the officers of the board. And then, so president, president-elect, immediate past president, our vice presidents and vice president-elect, our treasurer, treasurer-elect. And then there are 2 board members that are elected to serve on the executive committee. And so they're called board representatives on the executive committee. And this year that is Bill Yates and Leanne Allen, who are on the executive committee. It's a big executive committee for a big board.
So those are 2-year terms, and you can renew only for 1 year, correct?
1-year term.
1 year
We have
term.
an election every year, but you can only do it twice. And the board votes on those.
Yeah, so there's a solicitation that comes out before the election for those 2 board reps on the executive committee, and that's widely advertised. So anyone that's on the board that's eligible will either be able to self-nominate or will be encouraged to nominate.
Okay, and last but certainly not least is the dissemination of whatever the board decided. Oftentimes this looks like when we submit the final statement to an agency who issued an RFI or a notice of proposed rulemaking or something along those lines. If there's a statement that we're making, this is when we will post it on the website and we will highlight on social media, that sort of thing. This is staff's role, is then to act on what the board decided. And just a note here, and just mentioned this earlier, and it was something we talked a lot about, that if somebody asks you a question about how the board came to the decision, you can run through some of the decision making, some of the discussion, without getting into specifics and without attributing any sort of comment to any individual. We really want to keep the deliberations as confidential as possible, but it is okay to talk about how the board worked through that decision-making process. Okay, any questions on how things get to the board? Okay. So now I'm going to pass things back to Mary Ann to discuss member best practices. And as always, let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Can I have the next slide, please?
Yes.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time going through board duties and board norms. There's just a few additional pointers, other behaviors that can help maximize governance effectiveness. So the first is actively engage with your society, and this isn't always straightforward. We appreciate that. And so we're going to go through a little bit more of that in a little bit more detail, but we just want to get this in your heads that it's really important that you engage with your society about what you're doing as a board member for FASEB, because you are the conduit for a lot of information to the board. And then you're also the conduit for, as Sally said, what decisions have been made back to your society. It's, again, important that you engage actively during the meetings, and sometimes that can be helped and enabled by using your camera when you're able, except when you're driving your car, like Xanthia. And if you can please at least limit obvious multitasking while you're on the call, because it's really important that you are listening, hearing, engaging, and so that any decision that is made is one that's fully informed by everybody on the board. I'm sure everybody else has said this to you. It's like Zoom etiquette for the last 3 years. Like, we don't know what we're doing, but sometimes we don't. Like, we don't know where the raise your hand button is sometimes, but it's really important as well during a meeting, especially if it's a pretty lively discussion, if you can use your raise your hand button, then the person who's chairing the meeting, for example, Eric Kelly will be chairing the board meetings. He can see who is in line and queuing up to ask a question or make a comment, and he will get to you in the short order. It really helps that people aren't just jumping in during a pretty active conversation. We also encourage everybody to use inclusive language. We need to be respectful, we need to be inclusive, and we need not to have somebody dominating the conversation. So if you can just keep that in mind, that's good behavior for any large organization structure where different opinions come to the fore. And we've already talked about technology and using raising your hand button. This is all pretty common sense, so we don't need to belabor that. Best practices. So this slide provides suggestions from currently serving board members on what works well to engage with their member society. We realize this can be kind of a tricky thing. We will be providing board members with promotional toolkits. You can present in-person reports on FASEB activities if you can to your society board or council. That would be great. I know that in some cases, societies don't have the board rep present to the council or the board. You can forward FASEB for you, the quarterly newsletter that highlights members' benefits, because some of the members of your council or board may not know about that, may not have seen that, and that is a really great piece of information content. And it's also a good idea, if you haven't done it already, to schedule a meeting with your predecessor, just so they can help you understand the ins and outs and nuances of some of the decision-making that goes on that may be specifically relevant to your society. And it's just nice to know what the thought processes have been before you came on board. It's also critical to interact with your society if you can, because just as a reminder, FASEB is a federation. So we do not have any way of directly contacting the members of your society. All communication goes through you as a director on the board, or the executive officer of your society who meets with Frank as part of that council. And then maybe other members of your society who serve on task forces and other subcommittees or committees. But really, you're a major conduit for that information, and we don't go directly to your board, to your society members, so it's really critical. Next slide, please. I guess we're going to go on to the more tricky topic of society representation versus FASEB fiduciary. So this came up last time, and it is one of the trickiest things that we face in our unique roles as being members of the board. So except for officers and early career representatives, everyone on the board as a director is appointed by a society. So of course you represent that society on the board. However, as I said last time, as a fiduciary, when it comes time to make decisions, you must vote for what's best in the best interest of FASEB only. That's your fiduciary duty of loyalty to FASEB. So what that translates into is that prior to a vote, it's up to you to bring up information that's relevant to your society, important to your society, make sure that those pieces of information, those inputs, those thoughts, concerns are all voiced in the discussion so that everyone's aware of what every other society is thinking about, and that collectively we can then come to make a truly informed decision that's in the best interest of the Federation in total. It's also really good that if you're a well-established member of your society, you can provide unique insights that may not come from the executive officer of your society. And that's hopefully why you've been appointed to the board, and that you can bring topics that are really of specific interest to your society to discussion so that the board can become familiar with what your society, what drives your society, what the needs of your society are, and hear that relative to their own society needs. And finally, I can just say this another way, you do not have a representational role on the board. You are a representative of a society, but you're not a representative for the society. So to distinguish that, your presence, your input is great, but when it comes to time to vote, it's really, you're legally bound to act in the best interest of FASEB. And obviously we're going on about this because there have been times when it's been a difficult road to follow, right? Should I have my FASEB hat on? Should I have my society hat on? But when you're voting, it's your FASEB hat. And if you're concerned about it and you're feeling that you're not clear what you should be doing or how you should be thinking, ask the question, bring it up, because you won't be the first person or the last person to do this during the board meetings. Okay, next slide. So this, again, in a pictorial way, attempts to illustrate this dual nature. The board uses, in the funnel, uses society, executive officers, and their representatives, other representatives to gather information, you being one of them. And your experience as a well-established member of your society, as I said before, you bring unique insights into the topics that are being discussed. If it's not clear to you already, let me just state it. We value transparency in gathering information, and we value that because we want to make sure that we're making informed decisions and everybody's thoughts and needs are being represented in those discussions. However, once a motion's on the table, so the board deliberations, the discussion will be limited to board members only. This is private and confidential. So I think, as Sally said, you're perfectly open to go to your society and to discuss the rationale for a decision once the decision has been made, maybe some of the thought processes that went into it, but it's not, you should refrain from attributing any specific comments or arguments to any one board member or society representation, because everybody has an opportunity to talk. So we really need to keep those deliberations private and confidential so that the board can be as effective as possible in coming to the right decisions. So that once a decision is made, our culture of transparency dictates that we communicate decisions, including, as I said, the processes and the rationale to get to that decision to all stakeholders. So that will be done hopefully in a timely manner. It'll be done on behalf of the entire board, and the rationale should be clear in those communications. If you feel that it's not clear, speak up and we'll try to clarify the message so that every society gets a really crystal clear vision of why decisions were made and will appreciate what's going to be happening as we move forward. And I think we discussed this last time in the board packets, all the information that you're going to be getting during the board meetings. If there's any question about what you can or cannot share, bring it up, ask the question. And Sally, for one, will be happy to tell you what you may or may not share with your society. Any questions about this? I know we've gone over this a lot, but it really becomes confusing sometimes with this dual nature of society and being a director. Mike?
Yeah, I guess so I spent some time sort of like looking through the mission, and what I was wondering is if there's any sort of written guidance on how to think about your fiduciary responsibility to FASEB, right? Is it the existence of the organization? I only bring that up now because of I think
Where
it's
we
fair
are.
to say we're in a pretty unprecedented time in terms of the sort of nastiness of what particular politicians could do if they didn't like what we did. But like, yeah, just something to sort of provide some guidance, right? Because it's, yes, there's some financial component to it, but really this is an organization that's proactive about a lot of things, and it's representing a lot of societies. And so some guidance on how to rank uh, what components of the fiduciary responsibility to FASEB would be helpful to frame sort of how to best represent my FASEB responsibilities when it comes time to vote.
So I'll answer partly, and I'll defer to Sally to pick up from that. So first of all, when you get the board packet, it's really detailed. There's a lot of information in there that provides background for each particular topic that's going to be discussed, presented, deliberated at the board meeting. And in there will be an awful lot of information about how we got to this particular place and time, what the forces were, pro and con, what the different options are. Often it's presented as here's an option one, here's another option, specifically with regard to the financial decisions that have been made or going to be made. So a lot of that information will be provided in the board packet. In addition, you can go to the FASEB website, and there's a lot of information there, the member clicks information. Sally, you've already given them the links, but you can get the links again.
I'm going to do, that's actually the next section of this onboarding.
Okay. So that will also help in terms of where there's reams of information that will provide you with how past decisions have been made, and that may help guide you in thinking about where the future would go. I think the other thing to do is I would contact, as I said, your predecessor and just get a sense of how they had navigated in the past their responsibilities. It's really helpful to talk with someone who you know well, or maybe should know well in your own society, and have them discuss how they've dealt with some of the conflicts and some of the issues at hand. Sally, do you want to add some more to that?
I think the only thing I would add, and it's something that's been said before, like it's always okay to ask the question as well. And if you're confused about what that kind of, I'll say existential goal, but what is the overriding goal of a specific item? Other people are probably struggling with that issue as well. So I would encourage you to ask it. I do agree with Mary Ann that I think not that the decision will be obvious, but the outcome is obvious. So when we're talking about like the budget, for example, it is like FASEB's financial stability. If it's like, let's say we're talking about a science policy item, I mean, this is the time when, you know, I think the board can say, and we don't want to relitigate the work of the committee, but as a board member, if you see something that is undercutting FASEB's mission or vision in that statement, that's when you have a duty to speak up at that time. if you think something FASEB is recommending is going to harm the community, that would be the time as well. But I do think that I do think we try to make it clear. I do part of the reason why FASEB has a me and a Frank is also to, like, when staff are working on these things, to make sure that that is what the focus is as well, so that you don't have to figure it out so well. But I think most of the time it will be obvious, but it's always okay to ask.
And Sally's going to tell you in just a minute too that since we're all lifelong learners and we never stop, you will also have a mentor who you can contact directly about any concerns you might have, and take advantage of them, because we all had mentors when we started in whatever role we have, and it really proves invaluable. So that's another source that you can take advantage of.
And one thing I wanted to add to the previous slide where we're talking about that we are very transparent. I think we mentioned this in at least one of the other sessions, but the board agendas and material are not only sent to voting board members, they are also sent to all of the executive officers of our societies, and it is also sent to the public affairs staff of our member societies. So it's not considered confidential. If you have questions about something, if you want to learn more about how something would impact your society before the meeting, is a good time to talk about that sort of information. They will have the information. I think they often read it. And, but then again, when you are actually making the decision, when it's time for the vote, it needs to be in FASEB's best interest. But I don't think it's always clear. It's not always clear to new FASEB staff just how broadly distributed our board agendas are.
And Sally, Pam had a question about, could she get the addresses, email addresses?
Yes, I saw that.
Okay.
I will get those to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And then I would just note, and it's something we kind of glossed over quickly, the early career representatives are not appointed by a society, so your role is a little bit different. It's a little more similar to our officers who are representing FASEB rather than an individual society. But that does not mean that you cannot be in touch with your society and talk about how that's being impacted. And one of the reasons why we have the early career representatives on the board is we want to make sure that the unique viewpoint of individuals of your generation and career stage are taken into account as well in these decisions.
Okay. I think that wraps up, except for some closing comments by Sally, but I just want to give you a chance. Are there any other questions, concerns that anyone has about what we've talked about? Okay, well, I'm going to pass it off to you, Sally.
Okay, so I'm just going to run through a couple of resources real quick because I see we're close to time. As Mary Ann mentioned a little bit earlier, you will all be paired. You have already been paired with a mentor from our executive committee. I hope they've already been in touch with you, but if they have not, we will be sure to remind them again to do that. They're a great source for any questions you have about the agenda packets and that sort of thing. We also, when we have in-person meetings, we hope that it's a friendly face or somebody that you can meet up to take the shuttle bus over with to FASEB headquarters, and so you're not just in a room with individuals you've only seen online. The executive committee members, as we mentioned, are always available to answer questions. I have not done this yet, but I will, before our August board meeting, have a page on our volunteer portal, which I'm just about to show you, that will have contact information for everybody on the board. So please feel free to reach out to your colleagues. Before I show you the volunteer portal real quick, just a reminder, Frank and I are here to answer any questions. And if we don't have the answer, we're happy to push you off onto the person that does have the answer and find the right resource. for you. Also, please feel free, again, to contact Eric, Marianne, Beth, any of our officers, and they will help as well. And so finally, let me just show you our volunteer portal, and you all can bookmark. I'm going to put the URL here if you guys can bookmark that page, and I will share this. This is, instead of having a board binder, we try to put stuff on this volunteer portal. This is what you see if you're not logged in. If you go ahead and log in, and all of you are already in the system, your username is your email address. Mine's a little different, I apologize, but your username is your email address. And then you will, the first time you log on, you'll need to reset your password. So we'll go ahead and log on really quickly. So you can see there's more items here. Yours will look a little different, but you can find the board agendas will always be posted here under quick links. So the most recent one will be there. At times, there will be some items that are only available for voting board members, and I'll tell you where to get that information. This is also where you can find our bylaws, our strategic plan, values and policies, all that good stuff. So I think that's about everything. You can also find information. So I see all the societies. You will not see all the societies. You can also see who are the other volunteers from your society and that sort of information. Right over here, I have the board contact info from last year, but this is where the board contact info will live this year, as soon as I get that done. And then finally, as I mentioned, this is where you'll find the executive committee actions. And so we haven't really had any this year yet, but this is where you will find them. And we do try to post these within 24 to 48 hours. We do not want anything happening at the executive committee to be seen as a secret cabal that is not open to full board input or feedback. So I think that's about everything. Are there any questions? And again, you don't have to remember all of this. I'm happy to answer these questions later. And when I do send the board agenda next week for our August meeting, there'll be reminders there on where to find it.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. Appreciate the attention, the attendance, and the discussion too. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Okay.